think we're not going to be in town for it. So every time we go to Costco, we watch.
Thank you so much to everyone who's here tonight to learn more about what's going on at IPFW. I'm Kelsey Gillig. I'm a recent alumni of the anthropology program here at IPFW, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Andy Downs, who's going to be talking to us about this USAP report and how it relates to LSA and everything going on in the Fort Wayne community, along with the changes that will be coming to IPFW in the coming few years. Operating under the name Not in Our Future, we as a group of students, alumni, community members have put together this Facebook page, a website, and a lot of collaborative efforts have gone into presence at a lot of events to promote awareness of what's going on about this issue in the Fort Wayne community as well as at IPFW. Principal among our concerns is recommendation 2, which calls for the consolidation and restructuring of 13 departments listed on that board over there. They include my own degree as well as many of the others that I've talked to in this room who are either alumni or current students of those programs. IPFW is unique among universities in Northeastern Indiana in offering these majors, and with the recommendations that they stand, our university's very important role in this region is at risk. Do the students of IPFW not deserve the same quality and range of education as those in other parts of the state of Indiana? Here tonight we have Dr. Andrew Downs, an associate professor of the Department of Political Science and director of the Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics. He is here to provide background on the USAP, or University Strategic Alignment Process, and to fill us in on what it says and its implications for the future of IPFW and the Fort Wayne community.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I have a presentation, and like somebody who is, let's say, presenting in front of the United States Supreme Court, after I open my mouth and the first words come out, if we end up throwing this outline out and just talking about things, that is okay with me. So if questions pop up, you don't have to wait till the end. Raise your hand as soon as it comes to your mind. I'll do my best to answer them. And like I said, we may end up nowhere through my presentation, because in the end, this is about not only presenting information to people, but also answering as many questions as possible. I don't know what your questions are. I took a guess at some things. I have some general information to present, and we'll see where it goes. The title I've given this is What Should IPFW Look Like Today and Tomorrow? Because that's really what theoretically USAP was about. That's what the Legislative Services Agency report was about. That's what the strategic plan is about. That's what several things are about. And so I thought that would be a good title. I do have a few things I hope to cover. Like I said, if we get off track and onto other things, that's fine. If that ends up answering the questions people have, I want to talk a little bit about how we got to this point in where we find ourselves. I want to talk a little bit about what USAP actually says. By the way, how many of you have actually looked at the report or the recommendations? So that is over half of you have probably read it more carefully than I have. We have to remember there are other sources, though, of pressure and recommendations out there. Those don't always match up. USAP does not necessarily match LSA, which doesn't necessarily match other things that are out there. And so there really is no one path forward. But what we need to be thinking about is how we do move forward as a group. Yes? Legislative Services Agency. As a quick aside, just, and please, when I do that, when I use a term, when I throw some letters out there that don't make a word, please stop me, ask me what it is. I'll be more than happy to answer as best I can. As a quick reminder, for those of you who do not remember, the General Assembly in 2015 did 3 things. First, they said, IPFW, you are now known as a multi-system metropolitan camp or university. Second, we are going to create a group of people, a working group it was called, to look at the roles and responsibilities of IPFW to decide whether or not there is something that could be different about what IPFW is, especially now that it has this new designation. And then finally, we're going to ask the Legislative Services Agency, which is sort of the administrative arm of the General Assembly, to do basically the same thing that this working group was supposed to do. The hope was that those 2 reports would sort of merge together in a way that says, here's what IPFW looks like, this is why it looks this way, and this is the direction it might want to go. The Legislative Services Agency, or LSA report as it became known, included a recommendation from the working group that specifically said IU should take over nursing, and create a health sciences campus in Fort Wayne, and everything else should become Purdue. So as a quick example, Kelsey is an Anthro grad. Anthro is an IU missioned program, which means if this would have happened 5 years from now when the next Kelsey comes along, or 10 years or 15 years, that person would have a Purdue degree instead of an IU degree. I'm from the Department of Political Science, which happens to be an IU missioned department. Theoretically, if this had gone through, I would have become a Purdue faculty member instead of an IU faculty member as I am now. Now that sort of stalled out, and at the same time didn't stall out, but it's different than what USAP is. They are not related directly, but obviously they interact in interesting ways, and that's something that we can talk about down the road. All right, any other background questions before I get to more background? Okay, first of all, there was a bit of a recession that happened. Some of you may have experienced it in more painful ways than others, some of you not. But when recessions happen, an interesting thing happens on college campuses. Enrollment goes up. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You've lost your job. If you're lucky, you're somebody who lost your job and there actually is funding made available through the government or other sources to help you go out and get new training. And so we experienced a recession throughout the entire United States, certainly in Indiana, a little more so than others because of our manufacturing-based economy. And that actually caused enrollments to go up. And they went up in significant ways at IPFW and across the state of Indiana. That was a good thing because that meant more people were enrolling. That meant that tuition dollars were coming in, the dollars that students actually pay for their education. It also meant that the per student funding that was coming from the state theoretically was also going up, at least in total dollars. Not necessarily in per student dollars, but in total dollars, which made more revenue available to do things. Obviously, when you're in a growth mode, when you're seeing revenue go up, you can be, I would say, a little more casual about watching the dimes and the nickels to figure out where some savings might come from. But fortunately or unfortunately, a reality of recessions and that growth in the enrollment is that eventually several things happen. For some people, they find a job. And seeking that education becomes less important to them, so they stop out or drop out. Second, some people pursue that education, but the funding that was made available to them runs out, and so they also stop out and drop out. And then third, we like this category best, those students actually graduate. And so they are no longer paying tuition to us, and no longer are we getting per capita student funding. So that's something that happens. Now, when we talk about revenue, though, we really talk about two sources of revenue at IPFW. The first source of revenue is the tuition dollars coming from students. And then secondly is the funding that comes from the state. And depending on which institution you're talking about, some people like to use a rule of about 50% is student paid and 50% is government of some kind. But depending on the institution, it actually fluctuates quite a bit. Some instances it's higher, some instances it's lower, but it's where we find ourselves. But if you take into consideration the fact that state support has actually been declining for some time for institutions of higher ed, and the fact that after the recession boom, there was a drop in the number of students, you can start to figure out where financial issues will come from pretty clearly. I have just a couple of tables to show you quickly. This comes from the Chronicle of Higher Education. They actually looked at state funding per institution for, I forget the number of institutions they did this for. I grabbed three that are of some interest to us, IU, Purdue, and IPFW. IU, back in 1987, 46% of their money used to come from the state. By 2012, it was only 22%. Now you ask yourself, how does this happen? And part of it literally is that states across the country have decreased the amount of money on a relative scale that they are putting into higher education. For a lot of states, in fact, Indiana would fall into this category, in recent budgets, if you look at it, you'll see that the dollar figure actually has gone up, but when you take into consideration the cost of things, the percentage of revenue that it takes to run a university has actually gone down. So in relative terms, it's gone down, even if in raw dollars, it's gone up. That you can see IU, dropped over 20 points. Purdue dropped less, and some of you are wondering, well, wow, how did Purdue only end up with 40% or 39%? IU had 46%. Why was IU doing so much better? The government relations people from IU would have to say because of the quality of our programs, and other people would say because of the quality of your lobbying. But hey, whatever version you want to go with, I don't care. The reality is that Purdue actually has historically, on the West Lafayette campus, so we're excluding the IU Med Center, but West Lafayette manages to go out and get quite a few dollars for research from places like NSF and other federal government. This is state funding that we're talking about here. And so a lot of the revenue from Purdue was coming from federal sources. Not that that wasn't true for IU, but it's just the nature of it. And then if you look, IPFW was at 59% in 1987. We are not a research-intensive institution. We are not an R1, as people would call us, but Purdue and IU are. And what you're seeing there is sort of the difference in the focus on research. IPFW is classified quite often as a teaching institution, although several of my colleagues who are here will point out, hey, we do a fair amount of research here. Damon, I believe you have a small grant that you've gotten from somebody. Yeah, go ahead and brag for a second. What do you have right now?
I have a Mellon Fellowship and a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship grant last summer.
Not bad, not bad. Well done, well done. What kind of dollars are we talking about there?
Wait, in like money?
Yeah. Not for you specifically.
Yeah.
You know, what came to the university to help fund the projects that we're talking about here?
Over $20,000.
Yeah, which for us, I mean, that's a nice grant. We've had a few people over the years who've made it into six figures, but when you look at a campus like IU or Purdue, Bloomington, West Lafayette, there you're talking 6-7 figure things happening on a pretty regular basis. So for us, Damien's great. That's wonderful stuff. It's 5 figures. Congratulations. Go get the next one. Make it bigger. That's what we always hope will happen. But the reality is, we are not West Lafayette. We're not Bloomington. We're not Notre Dame. You know, we are a regional, comprehensive institution whose primary mission is teaching. Okay, that's the reality in which we find ourselves. But here, you see us dropping from 59% down to 38% in terms of state revenue supporting this. So that becomes pretty significant, doesn't it? I mean, you start to realize already, now granted that stops in 2012, which is where you start to notice a decline from the recession coming through, but you start to see where pain might be coming from. Now in terms of the enrollments, this is a little more current than what you saw. It also doesn't go back as far. IPFW happens to be this blue line up here. This graph actually comes out of a report that the Fort Wayne Senate did in response to the LSA report. So not to confuse LSA and USAP, but some of the data is relevant from both. And you'll notice that we topped out there at one point in terms of enrollment, full-time enrollment, never mind part-time. We have quite a few part-time students. But if you look at full-time enrollment, we were looking at 9,000 people back in 2010 at the height of things. And we have seen an unfortunate decline, but it's one that you can see happening at the other campuses as well, which simply demonstrates what you see happening in terms of a recession boom and then the decline that naturally comes from that. Now combine declining revenue from the state, declining revenue from students, but many of the operating costs of the university staying static, and you start to recognize there are going to be some issues. It's just the reality of things. A couple of other things to think about though. IPFW happened to reach, during this time period where we saw the boom and the decline, a moment when our last strategic plan ended, and like institutions all over the place, a new one was to be developed. It was developed and it was planned 2020, and was the first one under our current chancellor. It was done a little differently than ones done under the previous chancellor, and done in very much a different time period than the previous couple, actually, because we were not seeing growth happening. Even before the recession, if you look at IPFW's numbers, there was growth happening in enrollment, credit hours, students, etc. Some of that was because of changes to things like dual credit and some other things, but still the growth mode was happening. The general trend was up. But now we saw the strategic plan needing to be developed during a time period of decline. And so it was, and the chancellor, along with some other people, thought it would be a good idea to take a look and see if the strategic plan, or more accurately, the resources at the university were aligned with the strategic plan. That is not a crazy idea. It is one that actually makes some sense. And so USAP was created based on the work of a guy named Dickinson, who actually has a business going around to universities saying, I will help you align your resources with what it is you're trying to accomplish. What his business does. The University of Evansville has been a client. I contacted a colleague down there, and he said, client, that's maybe a bit of a stretch. Dickinson came to campus for a few days, did some interviews, gave a report, so it was not the full Dickinson model. He actually has a book that you can buy, describes how wonderful ways to do all these things on campuses. Evansville didn't go that full route, but they did engage in a process similar to what he recommends. IPFW, some of the leaders decided this was something that we should look at and pursue, and so we did. Now, here is, we're getting to the part about what USAP says. First of all, those first two questions there, how do we know if we're fulfilling our mission and our people strategies, et cetera, our resources, et cetera, focused on the goals. Not unrealistic questions to ask. In fact, quite realistic and quite responsible, one might even say, for a public institution to ask these questions. And so USAP had as stated positions, in quotes right there, produce recommendations on how to better align university resources based on data and strategic level planning. If we were in a growth mode, then you could always say new revenue that was coming in will simply get put into those things that are growth areas, which makes sense, doesn't it? You have an increase in state funding, and you want to see an engineering program grow, or a philosophy program grow, a linguistics program. That's where you put the new money. However, if you find yourself in a situation where revenue is going in the other direction, what do you have to do? Exactly. Thank you. Logical conclusion is you must be looking at realigning, which means taking from some places and putting in others. It's not unrealistic to say that's an expectation. The chancellor has been asked at times, does this process here, USAP, mean that there will be winners and losers? Does it mean there will be cuts? And she's tried to be very careful about how she answers that question. She does not want to instill a lot of fear and say, yes, we are going to cut everything. But at the same time, doesn't want to create unrealistic expectations. And so she uses a lot of words. And about the third or fourth time that you ask her the question in a very direct way, she gets to the point of saying, it could be there'd have to be cuts. So that's part of where we find ourselves. Now, USAP attempted to do this work by taking these 6 steps right here. And I think it's important for us to remember where USAP came from, how they were going to be doing their work. First of all, establishing measures for each unit. Not unrealistic. We see this happening all over the place, industries of all kinds. The question, of course, is what are the appropriate units of measure, and how do we develop them? Are they really worthwhile? Are they valid, reliable, etc.? Gather data from institutional research, human resources, financial services, about our students and our resources. So for example, over half of the students at IPFW are first-generation college goers. And we have actually learned, this may shock some people, that for a number of the scholarships that IPFW awards, if we were to, and don't remember, I'm the messenger here, if we were to actually shrink the size of some of those scholarships, we would A, be able to give more of them out, but more importantly, the people who are getting them would still come here. That seems kind of reasonable, doesn't it? Hey, if we can cut the size of the scholarship, students will still come here, and we can then provide more financial support. That's fairly reasonable. That's part of what we mean when we say take a look at the nature of our student body and gather some data, figure out what we might do. Write program reports using a common template aligning things to the strategic goals and performance measures. Every unit had to do this. Academic department, English, physics, engineering, theater, they had to do it. University Police Department had to do it. I'm the director of the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics. I had to do one. Everybody had to do one of these reports. And the idea behind having a common template was that it would be possible to then make some sort of comparison. Although it's difficult to conceive how you say what buildings and grounds does, or building services does, compared to what, say, accounting and finance does, you'd at least have a common way of gathering the data, and you don't have to go looking at all sorts of sources and reading all sorts of narratives. It's right there. That's the logic. It is unbelievably challenging. Just in the departments or the units as they became known, because not everything is called a department, you can begin to see where this might be challenging. I think that's pretty easy for people to see. You have a question?
Just to clarify, the strategic plan already existed before the USAP?
Yes. Yes.
So, because I was trying to figure out where to find that, and I could never find it.
Yeah, the strategic plan, actually,
It
go
might
to
be
Google.
confidential.
No. No. Strategic plan theoretically is available to lots of people. If you go to Google, type in IPFW strategic plan or Plan 2020, should take you there. It's available as a PDF. Yeah, if you can't find it, Google is screening you somehow in ways that you need to worry about.
Okay.
But let's put it that way. All right. After we've gathered all this common data, then we get to do some reviewing and deciding, okay, you know, if there's a department that says our goal is to do X, and X doesn't appear anywhere in the strategic plan, then you start to ask yourself, okay, does it make sense for X to continue to be done? Produce recommendations on how better to align university resources with the strategic plan, and then communicate everything in a way that is one of my least favorite words now, transparent to everyone. What is transparency? That's a very long conversation that we're not going to have tonight, I'm fairly certain. But you know, you begin to understand what it was USAP was trying to do. Now, we can argue about whether or not this was an appropriate way to go about doing things, but at least I'm hoping we can understand the logic behind what they were trying to do. We can disagree with the way they did it. We can disagree with several things about it. But at least we understand what they were trying to do and why they were trying to do it this way. At the end of year one, USAP is in its second year, but at the end of year one, the folks from USAP, 24 people, representing academic departments, administrative and clerical staff, they said, we can't make any recommendations right now because, here's a shocker, when you try to compare, let's just say, printing services with, oh, I don't know, music, kind of hard to. Let alone comparing theater to music, which are in the same college, or English to political science, which are in the same building even, in the same college and in the same building. So they began to recognize that if we're going to be serious about this, we have to think about a better way to organize the data. And they willingly admit that this has been a learning process for them. When they gathered the data, they didn't necessarily do it in the best way possible. And that if they had been able to do it differently, they probably would have now. But hindsight's 20/20. And so they identified these 7 themes that are ways to begin asking the question, how are things aligned?
Right.
Are they aligned? Yes.
Question. If they knew there were problems, why did they not seek a way to remedy the problems after they found the problems, rather than continuing with a problem-oriented system, which will lead to further problems because you have erroneous results?
Let me start with a disclaimer. I am not a member of USAP. That's the first disclaimer. The second is that USAP, members of USAP, have tried to speak with a single voice, which has been challenging at times because you put 24 people in a room, they hear things differently. And so that has, some would argue, stifled communication because they've been slow to respond about some things, other things they've been pretty responsive to. Third, no matter what, processes are flawed. Take the best work you've ever done, and I've seen some good work from you. Take the best work you've ever done. Was it perfect?
Of course not.
Of course not. Same thing here. The question is, at what point do you stop analyzing? At what point do you say we will not be subject to paralysis by analysis and simply move forward? How do you acknowledge the limitations of what you're doing and still produce something that is of value? That's part of the reason in the first year they did not make any specific recommendations about where resources should go or not, because they did not believe they had sufficient data to do that, okay? Now they did in the second year make adjustments to things. The nature of the adjustments, it could be argued, were not communicated clearly to the units. Why the adjustments were being made was not communicated to the units as well as it could have been, but they did make adjustments. Now, just as a bit of background, in the first year, USAP actually went to the trouble of developing a database or a method of contributing your data so that it could get produced in these common templates. Good luck with that one, by the way. But they did that, and the members of units who were responsible for completing the reports actually had to go to training. Which makes some sense, new software, so to speak, got to know how to fill out forms. So we all went to training if we had to complete a report. And during the training, they would occasionally say things like, and here's why we're gathering this. So it was not just type here, press enter, click this button. It was type here, enter this, press return, click this button, and by the way, here's why we're doing it. In the second year, since it was basically the same method for entering data, they didn't hold those workshops. And so there was a communication opportunity that was lost, contributing to some of the disagreement, discontent, and lack of understanding. So, to answer your question? Okay. So those are the themes. They said these are the themes around which we should be organizing ourselves. But come the fall of 2015, the Chancellor at the convocation, for those of you who aren't familiar, in the fall, the Chancellor holds what's called a convocation. Faculty members show up. Several things happen at this. People who are promoted get recognized. People who won prizes or awards get recognized. And the Chancellor usually gives sort of a State of the University address. And she said, well, USAP should do these things. USAP should think outside our current structures and ways of doing things. These are all quotes from the USAP report. Identify things that are poised for growth and investment. In other words, where should we look for possibilities of investment? Ask what new and innovative things we should be investing in. Reject the thinking that says, let's just stay status quo, because obviously with this happening to revenue and expenditures not necessarily keeping up with revenue not keeping up with expenditures, status quo is going to be a problem for us. Suggest creative and innovative ways to offer programs, online, brick and mortar, accelerated programs, not. I mean, these things are happening throughout the entire higher ed world and K-12 world for that matter. And then ask, how do we create a better future for IPFW? Once again, not outlandish requests, but what's missing here, but certainly implied by this, is the reality is when you're looking at where to invest at a time when expenditures and revenue don't match, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose.
Another question, you talk about investment, where it's come up before. Whenever there's an investment, there's an expected return.
Yes.
What is the return?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, within education in general, that's a question to ask. Education generally is viewed as a public good. And as you know, public goods don't necessarily work the way the private market does. And so your definition of return on the investment is different. It's not a true, business ROI. I want to make 5% on my investment this year. Education really isn't run that way. It can't be run that way. It doesn't work. And for those of you who think it does, look at the private institutions that are now under investigation. have failed, et cetera, et cetera. And universities have not always had a good definition of what the return on the investment would be.
Couldn't you look at like other examples of other universities like IQI in Indianapolis or the South Bend campus, the IQI there?
We compare ourselves a lot. In fact, historically, we've always had a list of 8 or 10 universities we consider to be our comparable institutions. But when you start talking about specific programs within the comparable institutions, they may not really be comparable. And so today, IPFW doesn't really maintain a list of comparable institutions. Instead, the suggestion is that women's studies should look for institutions across the United States that match women's studies here at IPFW. That makes sense?
But did the South Bend campus go through something similar to Fort Wayne campus is going through? Like, transfer?
Well, I think that this may be the thing to look at. These are the regional campuses. So IUSB, that's in the lower left-hand there, I think that's kind of well, I think this is them right here. That would make sense. They're the third largest. So you can see they saw the same up and down. That's basically what we've seen everywhere. And so you ask yourself, what is IUSB doing? Well, in some respects we don't know. But when we get to the question here about what's it mean to make the investment, what's the expected return, higher ed has not done a good job of defining what that expected return is. We're getting better at it. We know things like, well, I suppose it probably should have something to do with degrees awarded. Maybe have something to do with research dollars that are sought and actually brought to the campus. Maybe it's about services provided in the community, some of them for pay, some of them for free, or pro bono. But those are question marks. Okay, in the end, we ended up with 41 recommendations in the USAP report for year 2. Okay, they fell into these 4 categories. You can see the categories up there. The broad categories were build an organizational culture focused on continuous improvement, cost savings and efficiencies, invest to generate revenue, and then finally high potential areas for moving IPFW forward. Beneath that were other subheadings. And so a total of 41 of these recommendations exist within the report, as you all know. Something like 7 of them in the first category, 12 or 13 in the second and third category, and the remaining ones were in the fourth category. Now, not all of the recommendations, I'll say, are bad. The better way to put that would be some of the recommendations have broad-based support. So, for example, I went through the report before I came here. I grabbed one from each of those broad sections that I'm betting that a majority of us in this room, probably a strong majority of us in this room, would say, okay, that makes sense. The first one, streamline reporting. Now, for many of you, you don't know about this, but imagine your own job and all the paperwork you have to do. Universities are really good at creating reports that we have to produce. Really, really good at it, and we almost never get rid of them. So we keep adding more of them. And we do not have a single process for submitting these reports, which means every time a new report is created, it's a burden on somebody, and it doesn't all go into the same database, so you can't even pull out the stuff. Somebody wants it, we just want bullets. No, we want complete sentences. We want a narrative. And so all that stuff happens. And the reality is that what will end up happening in some departments is that a faculty member may be told, hey, you know what? This spring, we have to do program review, which is something at IPFW with all departments, academic departments have to do program review every so many years. And what will happen occasionally is, you know what? We're going to give you a course release for the spring semester so that you can do the program review. Now that has often meant we need to hire a limited term lecturer to teach the one course you're not teaching, or ask someone to teach that on overtime, to speak of it in terms of hourly rates. So perhaps one of the things we should do is look at all the reports that we have to produce, chuck the ones we don't need, or look for ways to consolidate. How many of you would be in favor of streamlining reporting? Yeah, here's a shocker. A lot of hands went up. All right. Second, explore and implement options for more efficient use of faculty and resources and chair resources, excuse me, where applicable. Not the greatest bit of wording out there. And to hear that, you're all probably thinking, I have no idea what that means. Kelsey's, look on Kelsey's face. And Kelsey knows the report. She doesn't know what that recommendation is based on those words. But they are the words from the report, and if you read the paragraph below that, you kind of go, oh, that makes sense. Some departments, well actually not some, departments are different. What one department does is different than another. The Department of Public Policy, the Department of Political Science, Department of Sociology, these are all departments where services can be provided in the community. In fact, in sociology there's an entire field known as applied sociology. Your purpose in life is to go out into the community and do research that benefits the community. Theoretically, this also helps to build the knowledge base, the volume of information available within the discipline. But the expectation is what you are producing are reports and presentations that are of value immediately in the community. You use the same methods or variations on the same methods that people use when they're writing an article that shows up in the political science, American Political Science Review, or one of the major journals or minor journals. But you're not judged that way because what you're doing is community-based. Now, I think that some of you probably know there are faculty members who have a greater presence in the community than others because they do public commentary, or they help to organize meetings, or they actually do the sort of things like applied research that I'm mentioning in this section right here. What this says is recognize that fact and create a reward structure that says, yeah, do that. So in other words, if you're in a department and you have a faculty member who can make a significant contribution to the community through reports and community-based work, don't punish them because they haven't published 3 articles in the last 5 years in refereed journals. Recognize that faculty member is different. And so create a reward structure for that. Also not a bad recommendation. And one that, quite frankly, already was addressed to some degree by changes in the promotion and tenure documents. Develop and implement university-wide strategic marketing plan that includes modernization of our website. Now, if this were 4 months ago, I would ask all of you, what's the last advertising you saw from IPFW? And my guess is, after much thought, you would all say, I don't know. You would have thought about it, you'd have maybe even gone online and started searching, and eventually you would have said, I got nothing. I found no marketing for the institution. In fact, some of you would point out that Indiana State, where is Indiana State located?
Terre Haute.
Terre Haute, if you're from there. But Terre Haute, if you're from this part of the state. Terre Haute, which is not near us, by the way, and there is no convenient way to get there from here on a state basis. I'm just being real here. Their colors are blue and white. They had billboards up last fall that played on the Blue Pride. I don't remember what the heck the marketing scheme was. There were people driving along like, ooh, a billboard for IP. Wait a minute, that's Indiana State. Crash into another car because they got confused looking at the advertisement from Indiana State in Fort Wayne. We were being out-advertised in our home city by a university that is 3+ hours from here. Not a bad recommendation. Now, of course, I'm hoping you have seen billboards, television commercials, and radio commercials. Hey,
30,000 strong.
We're going to take any advertising at this point we can get that's positive. Okay, and then finally, every institution provides some form of basic education. There is a belief that there is a general education that you should walk out of a university from having. It should be there. Whether you are at IU Bloomington, whether you're at IPFW, whether you are at Stanford, University of Chicago, I don't care where you are, there's a belief that when you come out, whether you are an engineering major, a philosopher, theater, a nurse, doesn't matter, this base should be there. IPFW was mandated by state law to adjust its general education program a couple of years ago. I was actually involved in the creation of that general education program, and I will tell you right now, it's not working. And I was one of the people who helped craft it. I admit it very freely, it's not working. It made sense at the moment we created it, but now that we've been in it for a few years, we know there are problems. So the idea, if you are a faculty member, my house, a number of students as well, would say, oh yeah, we got to redo that. That's something we've got to do. This might not be widely understood by people, but for a lot of us, this thing is not working. So once again, broad-based support. Now, in addition to the broad-based support, there were some controversial items. In particular, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. 2.1 and 2 said create some viability measures and begin to judge the viability of programs based on those measures. Let me use different language for you. Let's see how you're doing, and if you're not doing well, let's stop doing it. Now, for a lot of you, you're going to say, still sensible. The question is, what will the measures be? The third one, though, is the one that sort of made things blow up right away. Because USAP specifically identified more than a dozen departments that should be restructured. Now, if you all had paper, I would ask you to write down what you think restructured means. Pardon?
Restructured out the door.
That is the way a lot of people would see it. Other people would say, not out the door, merging, reducing, expanding, combining. I mean, there are a number of ways we could look at this. And unfortunately, there was not the sensitivity to the language that there probably should have been. Because if you look nationally, there are a number of majors that nationally are on the decline in terms of number of majors. If you look nationally, there are universities, colleges and universities across the country where faculty are getting laid off, programs are getting shut down. That's elimination. The language is not elimination. The language is restructure. Unfortunately, that's not sensitive to how people would read that. So in the context, for a lot of people, restructure meant out the door. For a lot of people, restructure meant shut the program down. For a lot of people, that meant, wait a minute, I'm a freshman, and I just started this program. I'm not going to finish in 4 years because I'm working, and so I'm taking 12 credit hours a semester, but it's going to take me an extra year to finish. Can I get the degree? For faculty members, I want to teach. That's what I wanted to do. That's why I went to grad school. And I have a job at a university, and I love what I'm doing, and I hear restructuring, and for some faculty members, it's like, oh my gosh, they're going to get rid of my thing. And I've been here for a while. It's not a Research One institution. I know what the job market is like right now. Chances for me to go looking for a job elsewhere in a field that's declining is pretty scary. So you can understand why this, the idea to restructure, quote unquote, is scary to both students and faculty, and really comes from, I would argue, a lack of sensitivity to the language. I've actually spoken with some members of USAP. What they meant by restructuring was merger. They didn't mean lay people off. They didn't mean stop having programs. 1 and 2, 2.1, 2.2, those meant possibly stopping programs. Restructuring didn't mean that. Restructuring said, hey, is there a way? I'll use my department as an example. I'm in the Department of Political Science. There is a Department of History. We are 2 separate units on this campus. But for the last 45 years, we have had 1 administrative assistant between the 2 of us. Restructuring could mean having 1 chair, 2 separate degrees still being awarded, and 1 administrative assistant. Now, the reality is, if you restructured, and you keep in mind this is not elimination, this is restructuring, you combine the departments or merge them in ways that make some sort of bizarre sense to some people. The savings that would come from this, generously, under $250,000 a year. Now, don't get me wrong, and if you want to give me $250,000, I'll take it. I'll be happy to take it. But in terms of our fiscal situation, drop in the bucket. And at what cost? What's the benefit that comes from? What's the return on the investment, so to speak, in this case?
I mean, just to add to your list here, I mean, I think a big part of the problem with the language, not just in 2.3 and other areas of the report, is simply the ambiguity. So people, like you're saying, don't know what restructuring means. And it could mean elimination of academic programs that keep the department. It could mean elimination of departments that keep the programs. So all that was left, very vague. And I would make the case that even if there were two departments who were merged together to save for whatever meager savings and to share a chair, that's a diminishment of resources that those units need in order to function well.
Yeah, and there is, I'll go down a road here for a second. I was having a chat with someone from another college after this came out, who, this particular college had actually gone through some voluntary restructuring. They decided they were going to change some things. In part because it's a professional college and there have been changes in the industry and they were going to change their degrees to match the industry. Fine, good for them. The person did not understand this concept. IPFW is a regional comprehensive university. They got that part, by the way. But if you are someone who is in comm, English, political science, and you are thinking about going to grad school, and keep in mind, IPFW, we have some master's degrees, actually offered from those two departments, not from mine particularly, but those two happen to do that. For our students, the vast majority of our students do stop at a bachelor's degree. That's it. That's the terminal degree as far as they're concerned, even though there might be a master's and PhD out there somewhere for them. But that's viewed as the termination, right there, and done, no more. However, for a subset of our student body, going to grad school is a reality. What are you doing, Sam?
Moving to Austin, Texas to get my PhD.
There you go. That's, congratulations, by the way. She is, take this in the kindness it's intended, abnormal. She is not the norm at IPFW. However, if you look at some of our students, I mean, the best of our students literally could be students anywhere. For some reason, they have chosen us. And as a regional comprehensive, we have always tried to provide services in a way that allow them to get to UT Austin, or for that matter, London School of Economics, for those of you who understand what that means. That's big time stuff. We have students who have gone on to William and Mary Law. I mean, we're talking about people who've gotten into top tier institutions that are post-baccalaureate institutions. And so as a regional comprehensive, we try to do that, but because we are a regional comprehensive, and this is the part the person from the professional school didn't understand, if you say, let's say we've merged all the social sciences into a department of social sciences, which is not an uncommon thing to see at certain campuses, or it's a department of history and political science and sociology or some strange thing like that, the students who are then applying to grad school from there, that actually diminishes the quality of the application. Now, it's hard for the professional programs to understand that because, nursing is nursing, engineering is engineering, whether it's mechanical, civil, or electrical. Your degree is an EE. It's an ME, it's a CE. They don't get that a Bachelor of Arts from a Department of Social Sciences moves you down. And so the result is that the safety school for people graduating from a regional comprehensive just went down, which means getting into that top tier just became all that much harder. And this person from the professional school didn't understand that. When I explained it to her, she said, okay, now I get it, I understand. And here is one of the challenges when you have a group of 20 plus people, most of whom are not from a college that has this as an issue. And that's not to say, by the way, keep in mind, faculty don't understand jack about what it means to take care of the property. Okay, let's be real here. I've heard faculty members complain about bushes not getting trimmed, and I'm like, seriously? You think building and ground hasn't done anything on campus? Look at the nature of the campus as a whole. It's a wonderful looking campus in total. So we don't understand that, they don't understand us. There needed to be better understanding. Now, here are some of the limitations. I'm not saying all of them, and I'm putting them into sort of broad categories into what USAP did. First of all, I've already covered this. how do you compare the physical plant to academic use? You can't do it. I don't care how much Dickinson says you can, there is no common unit against which to judge them. So let's just accept that as a fallacy, and that there will be subjectivity in whatever ends up happening. That's first. Second, availability of data. To your point, it's a flawed process. The census, how many of you have ever filled out a census form? A few of us in the room filled them out.
I actually work for one.
Work from, very good. The census is wonderful data. The census is truly a count of every person. Now, as a social scientist, someone who uses census data, I will tell you this thing. The census is incredibly inaccurate, but it's the best available data. So we use it. There's a problem here in that there's a question of what is the best available data, if there's even data available. And unfortunately, because there's been this sort of shift in what universities are supposed to do, there's been a shift in what the data is and does and what data is even available from an institutional research standpoint. So some data has just flat out not been available, and in some instances they went for the best available data, which was not necessarily good data for answering the sorts of questions they were trying to answer, but they were still trying to, which leads then to Steve's point about the ambiguity of recommendations. They'd look at data and kind of go, we think there's an issue here. Figure it out. That's their recommendation. Figure out this problem here. Third, resources to analyze data. How many of you are comfortable analyzing large data sets? Anyone in the room comfortable with analyzing large data sets? Yeah, okay, you're starting to see the problem here, right? Now, add to that, in terms of complexity, the fact that a bunch of this data is qualitative data. So you now have a large data set of qualitative data and a large data set of quantitative data. Good luck merging that all together. So there is literally an intellectual deficit at which we're going to operate here. Theoretically, we can overcome it by bringing a number of minds together. That's not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. And then in terms of resources, literally time. That's an incredible resource when analyzing large data sets. And then literally when you get around the table, being able to suddenly crunch numbers at a moment's notice when you do decide, hey, you know what, this is good. Can we drill down into this data? No one knows how in this meeting, so no we can't. Or we don't have the technology to do that, so no we can't. I mean, that's a reality of what it's like to work with data. And so you're magnifying that many times over. And then, because of what the Chancellor said, the whole reason for doing USAP from year one on, with the increased emphasis in year two on making some recommendations about alignment, there was pressure to actually produce something. So why did they produce something they knew was flawed? Because they had to. And then finally, working in a committee. If we had time, I know I've already gone longer than I was supposed to, but tough one. I haven't gotten a lecture in several weeks, so it's all coming out now, man. You're bad luck. That's all I'm saying. I would, if we had time, say, you know what, I would like us to work on a mission statement for the group in this room right now. 5 hours later, we would have 7 versions of that and still be fighting about what the words should be.
We can try.
And there would be people arguing about whether we should use this word or that word. And when you break down the data, let's break into committees. You work on this, you work on this, you work on that, you work on that. And then we'll realize, wow, you've approached it differently than we thought you would, as did you, and you. Now, how do we bring all of that together into what, we're screwed. You know, you produced this wonderfully elaborate report, and you produced this unbelievably minimalist report. Well, do we ask you to produce more? Do we ask you to produce more? Do we edit you? I mean, how do we handle that? So you're talking about just structural problems that were going to come from this. Now, one of the things USAP wanted to do was actually figure out how to institutionalize what they were doing so there could be improvement in out years. That's probably unlikely at this time. Yes, Steve.
So one quick point, I wanted to kind of get back to your point about comparisons across units. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that because of these flaws, the outcome of recommendations is naturally going to favor larger programs that are simpler to measure. And, you know, I would consider this to be kind of a fatal flaw. I mean, forget about comparing academic units to grounds. I mean, let's talk about the programs that say have 10 people graduating and one of those people is going on to a graduate program versus a program that has 100 majors where they're all going into a single professional field where the average pay is $30,000. So it's like, how do you compare success between those two programs? I mean, I would make the case that because of many of the things that you're talking about, this report, these recommendations, this process naturally favors the kinds of programs where they can be easily mapped. I would make the case that programs like smaller programs like anthropology or women's studies or language programs are not easily mapped. But even I think, English and comm, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, I think just because you can't map something doesn't mean that they shouldn't get resources.
I want to put a slightly different spin on this in two directions. First of all, the spin example, 10% of our students go to prestigious graduate programs. Done. I mean, that's a good sales pitch. But number two, the reality is all of this comes down to subjective interpretation of data. It is always there. And so, you're right, the measures that are easy to come up with are measures that typically end up favoring large programs, or programs that produce something that is easy to measure. Nursing, and nursing is one floor above me. I like nursing. I want very well prepared people to work in the health industry, and IPFW has a very good nursing program. But I will quickly point out, they know where all of their graduates are going to work. So yes, of course, they can talk about a good place to work. Education, ed studies, they know where their graduates are going. Where are English majors going?
Everywhere.
Exactly.
They can go everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah, and so if you begin, and I tell students this all the time, unfortunately many of our students, it's a flaw, spring semester of their last year, start realizing, crap, I've got to find a job. Really should have thought about that a little sooner. But what I always tell students is I make it very simple. Write down the list of things that made you decide this major. Is it the writing that made you do it? Is it the research that you got to do? Is it, crunching large data sets? Apparently someone over here enjoys doing that. I don't know who it is. Or maybe it was somebody enjoys crunching large data sets. Write down the thing, and then go to Monster and Indeed. Go to the big job search websites. Don't search for a title. Search based on skill. You can do that for a lot of them. And suddenly what you realize is, wow, this skill I have developed, these skills that made me want to major in this, that I think I'm good at, they're really used in the following industries. Then start saying, okay, of those industries, which one do I want to be in? Now, that means that if you go looking in you do analysis of the job market, finding jobs that say, looking for someone with an English degree, looking for someone with a political science degree, yeah, there ain't a lot of those. But looking for somebody who knows how to write, oh yeah, that's a skill everybody wants. And so that's the difference. And so that's what I tell students to do. But nursing, hey, 90+% of them are going to be working in a hospital or a doctor's practice. End of story. Done. Political science majors, anthro majors, comm majors, they're going to be elsewhere. All right, last thing that I think was a limit and a challenge to USAP are these two questions right here. Can we continue to be all things to all people? That's a question I've actually said IPFW has to ask itself. I've said it relatively publicly. This is the largest group I think I've ever said it to, but I've said it many times. And maybe the reality is we can't. If that's the case, okay, let's accept that's the decision that we have made and then move forward in the best way to do that. But that's a limitation of things. And then what's it mean to be all things to all people? Probably ought to answer this question first, then this question. So I got that wrong when I put the slide together. But those are limitations then to recommendations that would come out of anything that's like the strategic alignment process. Now, I told you there are other things that are at play, and I'm actually, believe it or not, finally getting close to finishing. Universities are not judged today the way they used to be judged. And this is all stuff that, Steve, when did you get to IPFW? 2000 what?
Oh, you flatter me.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
90. Yeah, it was the last century,
Okay.
1994.
1994. Wow. And in 1994, we were judged very differently. We were judged not on what percentage of students actually finished. We were judged based on the number of credit hours we produced, the number of people we brought in the door. And there was an understanding that at institutions like IPFW, where more than 50% of the students are first-generation college goers, hey, you know what? Some people who come to us, they are looking to take a few courses that allow them to apply for the next job. It's not to get a degree. That's no longer acceptable. That is no longer acceptable. Regional comprehensive institutions like us, especially those that are non-residential, part-time students are a reality for us. Now, and that was fine. Now, however, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, which has one of the best acronyms out there, ITCHY, ITCHY, now says, they have a whole program, 15 to complete. 15 credit hours every semester means you complete 120 credit hours in 4 years. They pitch it, they push it, push it, push it, push it. Dual credit. You can get to college with your first semester done. You can get to college with as many as 30 credit hours done. We can get you out the door in 3 years.
If you don't work at all.
That's irrelevant. Shouldn't be, but it is. So the way we're judged is different. And I would argue higher education missed the boat 20 years ago. We should have been making the argument what the value of the degree was. Unfortunately for us, because we were, I would say, somewhat egotistical, somewhat self-righteous, that a degree means something, that in itself is good enough, we screwed up. Because while we were standing by saying a degree itself is the value, others were saying, prove it. Is it about the amount of money that you make after you get your degree? Is it about how quickly you get employed afterwards? Is it about having employment in the field you studied? And some of that favored, as Steve pointed out, those industries that are more easily measured. Just because large data sets are hard to come by. So we missed the boat.
So the push for STEM is because of the job placement?
In part of it. I mean, if you look at the shift in the economy, and I'll get down there, focus on economic development, job training for the shifting economy. Indiana is still a manufacturing state, but the way we manufacture is different today than it was in 1972 when Steve got here, or whatever year it was when Steve got here, 1872 when Steve got here. It's different, it's advanced manufacturing now. No longer do the expression turning a wrench on an assembly line somewhere. No. How do you know how to use a CNC machine? Do you know how to work in an automated manufacturing facility? That's what people want to know. Do you have the analytical skills? Do you have the basic math skills to work there? That's part of the reason for the shift.
But it doesn't take much to go work. I've worked in a lot of those factories and you don't need a degree to go work in those factories.
And so here is where there becomes a tension in post-secondary education. Ivy Tech, which is the Ivy community college system in the state of Indiana, they can provide a lot of the training for the person who's going to do that frontline work. What we're supposed to be focusing on are the people who are a couple layers up from it. The engineers who are improving the process for the person who's going to be working frontline. That's what we're supposed to focus on.
The guy who's going to be the boss of the guy.
You got it. Yeah, that's what IPFW is, a four-year institution. That's what we're supposed to be looking at. There have been attempts to ease mobility between institutions. Anybody know what this stands for? Of course not. Why would you? No one should know what that means. Statewide Transfer General Education Corps. Of course, that's what it is. Theoretically, if you complete Gen Ed at any public institution in the state of Indiana, 30 credit hours minimum. Institutions can have their own variations, but there's a 30 credit hour core that everybody offers. You can go to Vincennes, and I mean no disrespect to Vincennes. You can go to Ivy Tech, I mean no disrespect to Ivy Tech. You complete the 30-hour Gen Ed core there. When you go to IU Bloomington, when you go to West Lafayette, they must accept those 30 credit hours and say you have completed general education. West Lafayette and Bloomington are different than Ivy Tech and Vincennes.
But you still have to have like 21 credit hours on that campus that you're going to in order to get.
Yes, but if the writing class that you took, if the math class that you took is not the true equivalent of the basic writing or math class that you would take in West Lafayette or Bloomington, then you come in at a deficit. And it's a deficit that can magnify itself over time. And so, but there's a push for students to be able to move around. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the research, it says you want students to complete, then students need to pick an institution because of programs, not because of convenience, not because of cost. They need to pick because they can change their major once they get there, but they need to pick an institution because there's a program there that is the program they want to be in. That's the indicator that says they will finish. Not making it more affordable, not making it possible to move from here to here to here to here to here to here. It makes no sense. But it's what we've been pushed for because legislators have gotten calls from constituents who say, my kid was taking classes at such and then transferred to such, and they didn't accept the credit hours.
Okay, so, increased mobility between institutions. The institution is judged by the graduates. Those who come into, say, IPFW, who have the intent to enroll, take X number of courses, but long-term they plan to go to West Lafayette. They don't count in the database.
Yes.
So therefore, we should not be teaching anyone who has the thought of transferring.
Yeah.
IPFW actually has a pre-vet program. We don't have any sort of bachelor's degree that you could complete. Anyone enrolled in that program is heading to West Lafayette.
So but we can't count them as
No.
return on the investment.
Right?
But that should count.
And so the question becomes, how do you do that? How do you, and think about this from the standpoint of ITCHE, from the standpoint of legislators. You want to create a system throughout the state that makes sense. And regional campuses, if you go back to their inception, regional campuses truly were the place where you were supposed to get your foot in the door and then go to the parents. That was even the case when I went to IPFW. The belief still was, you went here for a couple of years, then you went to the parent campuses. But remember, that's shifting in the way we're judging what campuses do. The reality was, some people, yes, would graduate from that institution, but that was not the role they were to play. Now the role is defined as providing educational needs in this community, some of which might be preparing students to go to the parent campuses.
Because couldn't you have like a volunteer cooperation between campuses saying they're able to track those students that go there?
And here's where we get to the point I raised about availability of data. It's almost comical. We laugh because if we didn't, we'd cry. It's almost comical to look at sort of a simple question like that and say, well, isn't there a way to factor that in? When you realize, no, not really. The best we can do is sort of take those students out of the end calculation. In other words, if you think about regional campuses, should get credit for students who go to the parent campuses and then finish there. We should get credit because we've laid the base. System's not set up to do that. And comical as that might be.
Actually, so we get penalized
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
for doing our job.
Pretty much. Yes. Which takes me to fiscal realities. Okay. 2.1, 2.2, there are efforts underway already. Some measures have been proposed. Some analysis has already been done. The measures, once again, as Steve has pointed out, favor large departments, those that are easy to measure. But here's the point I want to make. If you look at the list of departments from USAP that should be restructured, and you look at the list of departments that, according to these things, the viability standards, may not be performing at a particularly high level, they don't match up. They don't match up. There are departments that USAP has said should be restructured. But when you look at the viability measures, like, you know what, they're doing all right. We don't need to restructure them. There are departments on the viability measures that USAP says actually deserve additional investment. So this gets to the point of subjectivity. In the end, we really don't know. I mean, it's about having a conversation in the community about what we value and then putting resources behind it. Recognizing that as long as we're going to pretend to be, claim to be, a regional comprehensive institution, there will be the need to have departments that are small. It's just a reality. Comprehensive universities have certain departments. If they don't, they cannot call themselves comprehensive any longer.
Doesn't that make it harder to compete for like people wanting to just go online and take a few courses or online, like for example, computer science classes? I know people that can do all these courses online, which would be similar to a bachelor's in computer science, as long as they're able to go to Google and prove what they can do, like the code they're writing, they don't need their degree.
Yeah, well, that gets to the question of delivering in the method that people are looking for. So, you know, how much online, what's the balance between online versus brick and mortar classes? That's one part of the question. Another part of the question is actually a movement toward what's known as competency-based education, where your degree is not about completing, you know, this many courses. It's about proving these competencies. And if you can do that in, you know, 15 courses instead of 30 courses, congratulations, you get your degree. And then there is a final version of this where we talk about badges. And a badge is sort of like the analogy of someone say, well, that's you've completed a course in Pascal or, you know, whatever programming language you've learned, except now you have this badge that says you can do that. And how do we deal with that? You know, I mean, that's once again part of the shifting ground underneath higher education. All right. Well, I said we would talk a little bit about moving forward, because what the heck we should. And right now, the people who invited me are going, yeah, we're moving forward. That's going to happen. All right, first of all, the stuff that has broad-based support, let's not fight about it. Let's focus on the one, I mean, let's do them. In fact, a couple of the things in USAP were already underway. So that's like low-hanging fruit. Hey, look, we've done something. Congratulations, us. Didn't need to tell us to do them, we need to do them anyway. Next, this is a university, free exchange of ideas, much as I might stifle that, especially in the Senate, Steve. That's what we do. And so, as flawed as you might think USAP is, as flawed as the new measures are that have been developed might be, it's an idea that's been put out there. And so as a university, our obligation is now to discuss that. And that means asking a few things, doing a few things. First of all, I do think it's important for us to remember occasionally the status quo needs to be questioned. Where I did some graduate work, the economics department was not particularly highly rated. That's because at that time, they were sort of avant-garde. They were basically started from the position that the conventional way of viewing things is not the right one. And so in terms of the conventional rankings, they didn't do so well. But doesn't mean it was a bad department. Just had to accept what it was. Next, though, what question are we debating? What is it we're trying to accomplish? Is it just saving money? Is that all this comes down to? All right, fine. Let's have that conversation. Is it really about aligning to the strategic plan? Okay, then let's have that conversation. If it's about changing the mission of the university, then let's have that conversation. I don't know that we've ever really had a clear definition of the question we're trying to answer. And that's somewhat problematic. That, of course, sets things up for failure, as far as I'm concerned. Research, research, research. Gather data, however you define data. Gather information. Analyze it. Produce something. Look at things from multiple perspectives. I think that's important for us to remember. And then, yes, let's have a very vigorous discussion, but it needs to be civil. I'll be one of the first people to say I'm not a social network person. I don't face link, book, I don't any of that. I don't know what it is. I've never been to any of it. I don't have any of those accounts. If I'm lucky, I will die without any of them, which means I have not looked at the wonderful website and Facebook page that students have put together. Good sources of information. But some people wrote some things that, quite frankly, were insulting and inappropriate. And although I'm not in any of the social media world, when I have found out about things, I've actually spoken to some people, and I've been like, hey, you know what? Calm down. No one said your job should be eliminated. Insensitive use of language implies it by all sorts of ways. But don't insult the people who took on this task. Let's have a conversation about what it is they were trying to do, come to an understanding. I can tell you, in the time I have spent in conversations with members of USAP, There has been a fair amount of awareness building on my part and on theirs in terms of what they were trying to do, how I interpreted it, and others, how they meant it to be interpreted. And there were times you're like, wow, we never figured that would be the case. The use of the word restructuring as an example of that. So let's be respectful about it. But let's go ahead and defend our positions vigorously, and then obviously look for ways that we can move forward. But let's do so with that last bullet point in mind. We have to think long term. Things change very quickly. Universities are not known for changing quickly. Really, really not known for changing quickly. But in the end, our product, if you want to think in the manufacturing or the business sense, are people who get out in 4 years. 4 years is kind of a short period of time, but to set up a program that actually serves people for a long time, develops quality, you're not thinking in 4-year terms. You're thinking in much longer terms than that. And so we can't be thinking about what can we do this year that will save us a couple of bucks. We need to be thinking long term about what not only saves money, but also increases revenue for us. That's the way I would look at it. Now, I've gone far longer than anybody ever figured I would. Like I said, a pent-up lecture in me, and I feel so much better now. Are there additional questions people have?
Kind of starting this off. So, in the recommendation 2, and then 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. 2.3 has the list of 13 programs. On all these lovely pamphlets and on our poster, we have the 13 programs if you're curious or would like to know. But why would there be these 13 programs listed for restructuring? Although you said that USAP board does not mean that this means they're targeted for elimination, and that they never meant that that was supposed to be what that was implied, and that it was really insensitive use of language. Why would those 13 be listed right beneath stuff that says we're probably, possibly, maybe could eliminate some things? If it's not those 13 programs, what is it?
Let me offer a slightly different point of view on that. These are two things that need to happen. There are things that we should stop doing. All right? We shouldn't necessarily stop doing these, but we should change the way we're doing them. These do not have to be intertwined. I agree that the logic of them, the way they're read, really feeds into people believing this means elimination. But there are folks who are involved in USAP, and I do not want to imply a little bit of savings, but let's keep doing them. See what I mean? So it's a different way of looking at it, but that gets to the point, 2 points. Number one, insensitivity to alternate interpretations. I mean, a bit of groupthink took place. You had 24 people who were working on something for a while. They know what they meant. They don't necessarily understood how people would read it. And then secondly, it gets to Steve's point. These are going to be biased in general towards those things that are easy to measure. And a big chunk of the things in here are not easy to measure. So that's where it comes from. I don't think it was, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are some people who are like, yeah, we can get rid of that history department finally. Political science out of here finally, yes! Anthro done, yeah, women's studies gone. But that's not where most of them were coming from.
It seems like, I read the newspapers and I've seen every article I think that has been in either the Journal Gazette or News Sentinel, and it seems like the administration is saying that this is almost all budget driven, and I'm wondering, I can't see how the budget is going to be reduced unless you actually eliminate programs and departments in total, because it's salary, personnel driven.
Yeah, this is where, I said we haven't figured out what the question is yet. Bingo. Is it really just about cutting? Then let's call it cutting. And I'm not getting, the chancellor at a Senate meeting was asked 3 times, does this mean cuts? I'm pretty sure Steve was at that Senate meeting. It was not until the 3rd time that she got close to using language that acknowledged that cuts were a possibility. And so, part of this is, and I understand what she was trying to, I'm a political scientist, I understand message delivery, and I always tell candidates, get on message, stay on message, stay on message. When I worked in city government, there was a reporter who asked me a question 3 different ways. I answered it the same way every time. The 4th time she asked me the question, I said, my answer has not deviated. What makes you think it will this time? I can give you the same answer I've given you, or we can move on to a new topic. We moved on to a new topic. So I get why she was doing what she was doing. However, the reality is, from a political standpoint, message standpoint, acknowledge right up front what the possibilities are. That takes speculation off the board. Yeah, cuts are a possibility. Cuts are a possibility. End of story. However, how we get there, how we do them.
Can you talk about the schedule going forward as to when, like,
Yeah.
I've seen like December is a decision point coming up.
Actually, there are a couple of dates to think about. We have to keep separate LSA and USAP, okay? Let's talk about USAP since that's what we're here to talk about. USAP, over the summer, the vice chancellors and the chancellor have been meeting to basically take the 41 recommendations, and I'm going to convey this the way I describe it. They would probably use slightly different words. They're taking the 41 and they're putting them into buckets. The first bucket is, hey, you know what, we've already started doing that, so we're just going to finish it. There's a bucket of, no way in hell are we doing this, so let's not even pretend we're going to, let's just put it in that bucket. There's a bucket of, yeah, we might do that, we got to look at it, see if it's a possibility. And then there's a bucket of, we understand the recommendation but not the logic, or we understand the logic but not the recommendation. Can you explain it to us further? That's what they're doing this summer. By the fall, theoretically pretty early in the fall semester, there will be a presentation from the administration about what they plan to do with these 41 recommendations. Now, they may not line up neatly with the buckets I just mentioned to you, but conceptually you sort of get where that might go. And what their plan is at this time is to say, here's how we think we should move forward. Keeping in mind some of the stuff's up, the train's left, so we're not stopping certain things. But for this other stuff, here it is, respond to it. And if you think of it this way, USAP simply made recommendations. The administration's job is to operationalize the recommendations. And then you and I, as the community, have our opportunity to respond to the actual operationalization of those ideas. That's what we get to do in the fall.
Won't it be too late then?
Yes and no. They will put these things out there. We will have our chance to respond, and then theoretically, by the end of the year, the administration will know which of the 41 they're going to do. They will know how they plan on doing it. Some of which will change based on the feedback they get in the fall from the community.
So in other words, we've gone from a group of 24 down to 5 making the decisions.
Yeah, but I have some bad news for you. The chancellor makes decisions. As much as I might want to make all the decisions, I'm not the chancellor.
Well, I was
The VCAA
throwing in the VC.
makes decisions. I don't get to make decisions. The VCAA gets to make them. That's just a reality of the way it is. They, and I'm not suggesting this would happen, because there does seem to be the honest intent to get input on the operationalization of the recommendations. They could just say, we're doing X. Not seek any more input. You could do that. It's happened to lots of places. I don't think that's going to happen here. Now, here's where I say true and not, that these things are going forward or not. The chancellor has said, hey, you have better ideas, tell us. Now, realistically, that's not going to happen a whole lot over the summer. That's not going to, people have not spent 2 years studying this the way USAP has. But there are some recommendations that have been suggested. There will be more that will come out. And some of those will then get considered by the administration. The reality is, a suggestion that Damien makes in October is not going to get the level of scrutiny and consideration that the VCs and the chancellor were able to think about during the summer. That's the reality. However, there will be instances when that October recommendation is going to be, wow, that's a good one. We'll take that one instead and shift away. All right, so that's, as has been pointed out, if the chancellor and the VCs decide to not do stuff that's in USAP, they're basically negating the work of USAP. So there's almost political pressure to do what's there. That's why I'm saying yes and no.
I mean, I'm going to throw out this question because I think it's a question that both the academic community as well as the public community needs to be asking at this point, and that is, who do you think should originate and have primary control over questions involving curriculum and academic programs? And I think I'd slightly differ with you in the sense that I guess I'm very comfortable having the chancellor make some decisions with regards to things like rounds or with regards to things like budget, how much money goes to what thing, what area. But I'm not so comfortable having the chancellor or even other academic administrators over the summer when most faculty and students aren't on campus making decisions with regards to academic programs, for example, or curriculum viability. And I do think it's important to sort of talk about the things that are largely absent from this larger discussion. Longstanding principles like shared governance, for example, where faculty almost in shared governance model, which has been around for decades, faculty have primary responsibility in terms of making recommendations to other programs. Presumption is that faculty in those programs are the most knowledgeable people to make recommendations about, for example, whether or not a program is viable. So, I think, again, I would say this region really needs to ask the question, do you want to have faculty who have the subject expertise and knowledge in the academic program to be making these kinds and originating these kinds of decisions, or do you want to have legislators or other academic administrators who don't have that kind of central knowledge making the decisions?
And here's where, this is a fabulous example of where I'll say better discussion was needed. All right, because first of all, as a bit of background, faculties on the Purdue West Lafayette, the Purdue Cal and North Central, which are now known as Purdue Northwest, and Fort Wayne campuses, all passed a resolution with the exact same wording that said, administrations don't make decisions or plan things over the summer that affect our domain. You're the ones who tell us we're on unpaid vacation during the summer. Don't make the decisions when we're not around to actually provide you with the input you need to do this. Okay, so this is a problem not just here, this is nationwide, and bad enough. That resolution actually originated on, I think it was the West Lafayette campus. So it wasn't even the regional campus, I'm fairly certain it was the parent campus. But everybody passed that. The executive committee of the Fort Wayne Senate actually sent a letter to a memo to the central administration, to the VCs and the chancellor, that said, hey, remember, this thing was passed, so be careful about what it is you're doing over the summer when none of us are here to provide the input that's needed.
Can you just remind us when the USAP report was released?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to.
I
Those who don't remember.
It was 4:30 p.m. on the last day of classes, like almost as a joke.
Actually, let's be clear, finals week.
Oh,
Not the last day of class.
oh yeah, beyond.
Finals week.
Yeah, last day
Friday
of finals.
or Monday
Fridays
grades.
were due.
Monday when grades
Yeah,
were
Due,
due.
yes, yeah.
Friday,
So, realistically, that one was definitely thrown out with the trash, to use the political terminology. But the faculty senate, executive committee sent that reminding them of the thing that we passed that said, be careful about doing this, so it's recognition of shared governance. There's something known as the Inter-Campus Faculty Council, which is has faculty representation from all the Purdue campuses. They basically wrote a letter that said, hey, what is it you're doing, and why are you doing it now? And many were paraphrasing, but it's like a 2-page long letter that was written in a committee, so you know the joy that was. Now, having said that, I want to make 2 other points. One of them, in support of administration, is very quickly to show how we need to look at this from varying perspectives. Steve said, do you want faculty who have content knowledge making decisions about curriculum and about programs? Yes, I think we can all agree with that. But in the end, the administration's job is to run the campus. And if revenue is short, then it's not messing around with the curriculum to say that department should just no longer exist. So, and I think Steve would probably recognize there's a legitimacy to administration getting to have some say about that. Not about programmatic issues, not about curriculum issues, but about what we offer they have a role to play there.
They have a role, but I think we're in very dangerous ground when there's not a conversation.
Yes, yes, and that's the shared governance point. So just to demonstrate how this needs to be a discussion, there has to be some dialogue here that really seems to be missing, and not just here. This is something you see across the country, unfortunately.
I just had one thought, like, we just had a short legislative session, and we've known about these budget shortfalls for a long, long time, yet I didn't see or hear of the administration going back to the legislature and asking for additional funding
Right.
for our campus.
Very quickly, Indiana makes a budget every 2 years, and it is incredibly unusual for the legislature to free up money in a non-budget year. If the administration here had gone to the General Assembly and said, please give us more money, it is very, very, very likely the General Assembly would have said, no, we don't do that in non-budget years. That's the first point. The second point is that at a time when, although state revenues are moving in a positive direction, the General Assembly is very conscious, having just come out of a recession, about not letting the rainy day fund get too small and wanting to cut, quote, unnecessary programs. Make sure that you take the steps necessary, whether you as the Department of Transportation or IPFW, that you take steps to rein in costs as much as possible. And so what they would have said, if they were even willing to free up money, would have been, what have you done to cut costs? Which takes us back to what's the reason we're having the conversation, as well as recognition that some of these are about cuts.
In recognition of the conversation idea between administration, faculty, students, alumni, forming community, I'm gonna use the word you hate, transparency, and the lack thereof. So I know about the Vice Chancellor Drummond's viability measures that he produced, and I know a little bit about them. I have no idea if USAP is using those same viability standards, or if they've made their own. What are they? Why don't I know?
Let's be clear about something. USAP said they should be developed,
Okay.
and the Vice Chancellor is now developing them. And the Vice Chancellor has shared those with what's known as the Academic Officers Council, the AOC, which are the deans, folks like that. The deans have shared them with department chairs. Some department chairs have been generous and shared them with faculty members, and so now there's a bit of a discussion going on about those. USAP did not use those. The measures USAP used are actually listed in the USAP report. They are different than what the Vice Chancellor has proposed. Second, USAP, done. Their work is over. So even if those were produced now, it's not like USAP's going to go back and go, oh, we changed our mind about restructuring. They've produced their report, so their work is done.
What about the shortfalls then? So like the data, the metrics, the standards that they've used, and the conversation we've been having about how larger programs are obviously favored by those metrics, is there even a concern for that lack of comparison for smaller departments, or a conversation about why it doesn't work, and any conversation about how it could be improved?
Once again, USAP's work's done,
Yeah.
so
I know.
no changing there. But the conversation with the Vice Chancellor, that's ongoing. And I can tell you, as far as the faculty leaders, and just as a quick lesson on faculty leadership at IPFW, there is there's something known as the Fort Wayne Senate, which is predominantly faculty members. There's a presiding officer who, I like to say, makes the train run on time and administers the Senate. There is a speaker of the IU faculty and a speaker of the Purdue faculty. So when we say faculty leaders, we usually mean those three people, the presiding officer and the two speakers. They have made very clear to the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, of the, was it 4 measures, right, that are in the viability standards, is 4, right? 2 of them pretty much are biased toward large programs. And so that's been pointed out to the Vice Chancellor in 30-some questions that we sent to him about his measures. And by the way, it ends up being subjective anyway, doesn't it? Because I've known Carl for a while, the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. He likes data. Some people say he likes it too much. He likes data. But data simply gives him a starting point for a conversation. And it will be, remember when I said that if you're comprehensive, that means you have Department X, because that's what comprehensive universities do. And in his mind, even if some of those end up performing poorly, the question is, okay, how do we make that perform well enough that we can still claim to be a viable comprehensive, or that we are a comprehensive university? What was that?
And what question are we really trying to answer to begin with?
Still trying to figure that out.
So if you had a student that was wanting to major in political science coming in this fall, would you say that that student would be able to finish the program at IPFW in 5 years, say?
I want to remind people what the administration said about LSA. They have made similar statements about USAP, but I think it's an overarching principle that we can always assume, I should say always, that we can assume is in place now and will be for the foreseeable future. When the report came out, the comment was made, we would grandfather in different things. The expectation is here, things would be grandfathered in. So even if political science were to be disbanded, everybody who's in right now, political science will exist until those people are through. Whether that means they've dropped out, they've stopped out, they've changed majors, or they've graduated. We would provide the service until they're gone. Now the reality is the service would be diminished tremendously because some people would immediately go look for work elsewhere, understandably so. When people retire, they would not be replaced. And so you could take a department of, say, 6 people, and by the time that last person is making it out the door, the reality is we might be down to, 1 faculty member who simply then disappears when that last person leaves. So the quality of the program is no doubt, quality would go down.
But it would still be there for those people.
It would still be there. The expectation is, the statement was made after LSA, the expectation right now is that if something were to stop, the way we'd actually do it was we would stop admitting people. And then the program would run until the last person is out. Then the program would stop. It would no longer exist. And for those of you who don't understand this actually happens already. My brother-in-law has a graduate degree from a place that no longer exists. It happens already. And typically that's the way it's done. How do you help them through? The dean of the College of Health and Human Services came from an institution in Kentucky. And an institution near where she was basically shut down a program. That institution's actually been calling other universities saying, how can we get our student into you? How can we make arrangements to help them finish? So I can tell you that IPFW, certainly as far as the faculty is concerned, certainly as far as the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Student Affairs are concerned, our goal is to make sure that if you started, you will be able to finish the degree you started. There may be no one else who may write you down as the last person to earn that degree, but our goal is to make sure that you got what you came here for.
So my son, I spoke to you in this
Yep.
about maybe possibly 20% college, but then if I understand correctly, it kind of sounds like maybe you're advising I don't know, it just sounds pretty risky. I don't think we're going to jump into political science at this time after a year somewhere else. And coming back for various reasons, but at one time there were a lot of classes, a lot of choices, public policy. If he's one of these last ones coming in, it doesn't sound very good for him.
Here's what I can say, just as a quick example. And you'll notice I have tried to avoid using political science as an example because this is not about political science, this is about the institution.
Right.
Political science is actually on the list, the USAP list for restructuring. It's not on the list of viability standards. So already you could make the argument, hey, you know what, it's fine, it's going to continue to exist. Having said that, if you look at the faculty who are there now, assuming that your son is able to finish in 4 years, one person will be retired. That I can guarantee, because he's coming up on his last year. Everyone else,
So you would
unless
still
something really strange happens, we'll all still be there.
So you would
Your
still
son
have a
comes in.
wide
In
range of
fact,
classes?
he called me up, we had a chat.
I know, he wanted to
And-
come tonight, but wasn't.
Yeah.
He's.
I can wholeheartedly still recommend that he come and be a political science major. I can wholeheartedly recommend that, and would do that whether I was in this public room or not.
Well, that question just makes me think, I mean, just my sense of the general mismanagement of an issue like this. So you have a university, and I know I'm faculty, so I'm biased, but from my point of view, a university is academic programs, and everything else is in the service of those academic programs. What the community cares about are the academic programs. So if you're having budgetary problems, why would you highlight academic programs might be in danger, which then throws into the community like, what?
Yeah.
And nothing else matters. You know, when people are coming to a university, they're not like, what kind of administrative suites do you have at this university? Like, all people care about. So, I mean, I just feel like from a managerial point of view, like that should be like nowhere on the table, because that's what's going to freak people out. I mean, it freaks out the loudmouths, who are the faculty and the students, and it freaks out the community. Whereas no other part of a university, nobody would even bat an eye.
Yeah.
And you know,
I want to make a couple of points here. First of all, from a political communication standpoint, massive failure. Let's just clear that up right away. You've made the point. I'll do it in very few words. Massive failure. Those are the two words I'll use to describe it. Secondly, though, what's different about, say, university police or the physical plant versus English or political science is they adjust all the time. Whereas we have clearly defined units where it's possible to add and cut. And that magnifies when those sorts of changes are going to be made. And if you look, there are some non-academic units that have actually seen this happen.
mm-hmm.
And it's happened over the span of 12 months, whereas we're going to talk about it, you know, as far as fall semester and spring, et cetera, et cetera. Now, having said that, I don't know how many of you know Nick Gray, but he's part of the Upward Bound program at IPFW, and when the LSA report came out, let alone when USAP came out, I ran into him one day. He was at a local high school, and he's talking to a group of juniors, so not even people who were like in the fall going to be here. This is in the fall semester, but he had students saying to him, should I even come to IPFW?
Yeah.
So to make the point,
Exactly where we're at.
and yet, these are juniors in high school who
Yeah.
saw this as a bad message. So massive failure in terms of political communication. Massive failure.
So we have to be out of here by 9 because they're closing.
Oh.
So I just, not to cut it short, and there's still time
take
to.
coffee while we still have it out.
There's still probably time to ask a few questions and have discussions, so, but we will be forcefully removing.
There's some badass librarians out there.